Welcome back to the Director's Chair, featuring the works of Paul Verhoeven. Today we continue our coverage of Verhoeven's quintessential film, the one that best captures not only his film style, but also reveals many of his artistic origins. Get ready to go to war with Paul Verhoeven in the 1977 critical and commercial smash hit Soldaat van Oranje, also known as Soldier of Orange. If I had to play favorites, I would tell you Soldaat van Oranje is my second favorite Paul Verhoeven film. The fact that I picked Rogier van Otterlo's score of this film as part of the leader should tell you something. Soldier of Orange is deeply personal to Paul Verhoeven, first of all, to all who amalgamated into the character of Eric Lanshoff, secondly, to everyone who suffered through the occupation and recognized that it succeeded in capturing the atmosphere of what that was like. No other movie has come this close to showing just that. There's a reason this film was initially not distributed in Germany, and not just due to the anti German sentiment expressed in the film, as we will see. The English call the Germans Jerry. This is a play on German and the container the German army pioneered that became so important in the desert war of North Africa, where petrol and water were always in short supply. The Americans refer to the Germans as the Krauts. That's short for the German dish of sauerkraut. The French call them Bosch, from Albosch, which is a slang word. It means wooden head. We Dutch have another word for them, mof. It goes back all the way to the Middle Ages, and it derives from the words muf, someone who is cranky and has a big mouth, and someone who's unmannered. It also refers to a hat. Enlightenment era German mercenaries would wear against the cold. The point is, nobody likes Germans. Our royalty, as is the royalty of all European monarchies, is Habsburger, German. They tend to intermarry, and our royal house has a tradition of picking spouses from German princedoms. Don't let the Argentinian origins of our current queen fool you. You know who moved there circa late spring 1945. So in the late 30s, Crown Princess Juliana married Bernhard von Lippe-Biesterfeld. He was in the Nazi Party. He was in the SA, and he was later in the SS. Her daughter, Princess Beatrix, would marry Klaus von Amsberg. He was in the Hitlerjugend, and he was also in the Wehrmacht. All this did not endear the royal family to a large segment of the population. Loyalty to the House of Orange and the wish for an independent republic has divided the countries for centuries now. Nowhere was that more present than during the war, and as a result, it's a major theme of Soldier of Orange. It starts and ends with the return of Queen Wilhelmina and her personal adjutant, Erich Lanshoff. Royalty is a big part of Soldier of Orange, not just because they are in part the subject, but also because they are in fact the benefactor. Just where did Rob Hauer get all that money from? That vast sum of 5, some say 6, Paul Verhoeven says 6.5 million, which is a tenfold of the average film budget of the time. The royal family was a big part of the premiere, which was a star-studded red carpet affair. And it was in the most revered movie theater in the country, which is Tuschinski Theater in Amsterdam. Soldier of Orange was shot in two. There was 2 7-week periods, one in the fall of 1976 and the other in the spring of 1977, the year of its release. Reason for the delay was money. Originally budgeted at 3.5 million, at the end of November, they only had shot 60%. Verhoeven claims he received an additional 1.5 million. Hauer claims the budget ballooned to 6.5 or 5 or 5.5. It changes. To this day, there's discussion about the ad budget, and it's assumed Howard just pocketed most of it or funneled it into one of his other movie projects. Soldier of Orange finally premiered on September the 22nd in Tuschinski Theater in Amsterdam, which is odd because the movie is centered on The Hague and that has its own Tuschinski Theater. But the one in Amsterdam has a few more seats, perhaps. Now, the international premiere is not until August 16th of 1979, whereupon it's nominated for a Golden Globe in 1980. Rutger and Jeroen showed up on motorcycle, reenacting their famous scene in the film. And according to Cabé, he realized at that moment the vast difference between himself and Rutger Hauer. Rutger basked in the adulation. He was having a great time. Whereas Cabé had to get used to the pomp and circumstance, and he felt ill at ease. Roelsema was on hand, and he had his famous hug with Rutger. Queen Juliana, daughter of Wilhelmina depicted in the film, attended, as did our future Queen Beatrix. So this whole thing was quite the happening, and the royals don't really make a habit of attending these things. So it's quite unique. In many ways, this was a media event to prop up the reputation of the House of Orange. It had suffered due to the antics of Bernard, who was there, and he was present and unperturbed as always. The audience was tense as a result. Hauer was seated next to Her Majesty, and he actually tried to distract her during the sex scenes, of which we know there are many, but Juliana would have none of it, and apparently laughed merrily, and this broke the tension in the theater because, of course, they were all waiting for her reaction. To a large degree, the population felt sympathy for Juliana. She was actually a very popular queen because everyone recognized she was just holding her head up as her own husband was undermining her reign. After the screening, the queen walked out with Paul Verhoeven's mother. She apparently remarked, "Well, that's quite enough of that. Let's all go home now." Exit stage right for the royal household. After that, Howard got busy, and he milked this film for all it was worth. And many cuts and edits exist for different markets. The most notable one, the one that caused the rift between Verhoeven and Hauer, is Survival Run, a 114-minute cut instead of the 144 original minutes that has a incredibly terrible dub and is mostly denuded of anything resembling Verhoeven's style. Typically, the phone started ringing for Verhoeven, as it had after the success of Turkish Delight, and just like before, Hauer sabotaged him at every opportunity. The critics hated it. Of course they did. It was almost universal. In a later interview, Paul Verhoeven remarked that anything that smells commercial to the critics is suspicious to them. When it's commercial, it can't be any good. Nothing that is popular can be art. It shows from some of the remarks from newspapers, like an expensive film like this does nothing for film culture. Another says, the adventures of these shitty heroes are predictable and without surprises. And another says, movies like Soldier of Orange are a dime a dozen everywhere else. Soldier of Orange has since become a successful and long-running musical. I mean, decades. The musical did get good reviews. Soldier of Orange, however, has long since become a cult classic. This is considered one of the most realistic war movies ever made. Rutger Hauer, Jeroen Cabé, Dirk de Lint, they all had careers in Hollywood. The House of Orange is still ruling, and Roelsema's reputation lasted until, well, April of 2026, I would say. When you went to the movies, you always got the Polygon newsreel, a tradition that was maintained until well into the 70s. Now, in this montage, the starting montage, Verhoeven mixes original footage seamlessly with his own, color graded and all. It's indistinguishable. The only thing that gives it away is the zooms and stills of Erik Lanshoff, who is escorting the queen as she makes her way from the Dakota to the palace. Now, the opening scene of the pledges being hazed is a direct reference to fascism. Bald heads suggest labor camps. The violence and the randomness of it all alludes to the occupation that is to come. It suggests these men are being initiated, not just into this fraternity, this secret society that will redefine them as people, but they are prepped for war. The hazing of pledges, we call them feuten from fetuses, are a culling method to sift through usually around 300 applicants. The humming they are made to do is real. It's just something you were made to do. Uh, Everything just seems like nonsense, but in reality, it's steeped in ancient pagan traditions that, thanks to the Epstein files, are now shown a very bright light on. This is the actual original Minerva building, but filmed in Sociëteit Phoenix of the Delft Student Corps. Every major university has one. There's a reason for that. The corpora, or the poor, are the elite. They have their origins in the original Lord 17, the owners of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, which was the richest and most powerful global corporation the world has ever known. It was worth in current value about 8 trillion. The closest thing to the VOC is BlackRock, who currently owns and controls around 40% of the wealth of the planet. They don't come close. The student corps are like the VOC, a country within a country, and its members have a shoe-in for every important job. Now, the hazing scene is therefore very significant and tells you exactly who Erik Lanshoff is about to become. The corps forms your identity from then on. You are reborn. You can compare it to the US Marine Corps, except the Dutch Marine Corps is much older and fought in a lot of more wars to make the VOC ever more profitable. 1938, and the three feuten hide from the melee and strike up an acquaintance. The Praeses enters the leadership of the fraternity, so everybody must sing. Singing is a big thing in the Corps. It's one of the reasons I wasn't a member. The three hiding under the table decide to sneak into the dinner, but they get caught. So the three are made to sing. Of course they are. The Praeses gets bored and he pours the soup bowl over his head and then bashes poor Eric in the head with it. Hazings are common. They occasionally result in accidents. In extreme cases, students die. We see Eric convalescing the next morning with a large bandage on his head. He has 8 stitches. The neighbor's kid and his girlfriend pay him a visit with an offering of beer. They're supposed to be off to play tennis, but little Esther prefers to stick around and hear Eric's war stories from the Corps. Just then, the Praeses shows up to apologize. He offers him a room in the fraternity. This is actually a big deal because the student dorm on Rapenhorst, that's Minerva headquarters. Paul Verhoeven also lived here in his days at Leiden University. And so did his wife. The Praeses tell him to call him Guus from now on. So Eric agrees and says, yes, sir. So Guus laughs and he just calls him a dick. That's a dick is always the Dutch word lul, which is always the second or third words out of their mouth. So Alex receives college notes from Nico. They run into Jan, who also attended class. He was boxing. So they decide to surprise Eric by climbing up his window. This is an ingenious way of introducing all the major players. So Eric is playing records in his student room and he calls Guus down and then Jacques shows up and he just passed his midterms and he got a camera and it was a gift from his father. And they decide to take a group photo. And so they're smiling and they have drinks in hand and they give their traditional mogge. The easy life continues despite war tensions. They are having a tennis tournament. The BBC is on the radio and it announces war. So it's September 1939. And the war seems far away to these people. They laugh it off and just continue playing. Now, in the next scene, Guus has passed his exam. They are in the sweat room where you leave your signature on the wall where you graduate. So this room is covered floor to ceiling in signatures. It's a century-old tradition. So Paul Verhoeven's signature is also on that wall, as is my wife's. Guus Lejeune signs and dates the moment, May 9th, 1940. And so we know that this is a famous date. This is the day before the invasion. So we see a celebration at the Sociëteit. that night. Esther is checking out Eric, and there's something brewing between them. Eric is actually the only one not in uniform. He's been exempt because he has bad eyesight. So all the others are naval officers, except for Lex, who's in the army. You can see that from the uniform. So Esther stays behind to dance with Eric. And afterwards, good old Eric cucks his friend. So we get the first of many wonderful, gratuitous 70s boob shots. And just then, airplanes fly over. So Eric looks up and he has a thing for planes and he identifies them as German. And he assumes, well, they must be headed for England. But then, just then, the air defenses start. And so the next scene shows another air raid. It's actually in Square 1830. Side note, I used to live nearby. So Eric and Guus are on their motorbikes. This is the famous scene. Two measure sweeps swoop in and they attack the Frederiks barracks. This is the expensive scene that almost ended the film. As you can see, they make the most of it in the editing. The barracks are actually in another city where they shot this, and they were earmarked for demolition. And of course, the film production was more than happy to help that along. In the film, Guus and Erik report at the base because they've decided to join up. At the 11th hour, the staff there is scrambling to resist this ongoing air attack, and they assume that Guus and Erik are Germans. Now, this paranoia is real because the German army used many infiltrators everywhere to disrupt communication, cause havoc wherever they could. They would just pose as civilians, and the guards are instructed to make them say Scheveningen.
Stop, wat doen jullie?
We komen ons melden als vrijwilliger.
Ach, je bent gek, donder op man!
Nou, laat ons er door.
Het zijn moffen, verklede moffen.
We zijn gewoon Hollanders.
Allemaal schu laten zeggen. Moffen kunnen geen schu zeggen. Zeg eens Scheveningen.
Scheveningen, Scheveningen.
Nee, oh, Scheveningen.
Scheveningen. Geen schoonmoeder, Scheveningen.
Schu. Nul. Nou, ja, laat maar door.
No one but the Dutch can pronounce that correctly, not even Germans. So Eric gets annoyed and starts repeating the hard part, the dick, like the arrogant frat he is. In real life, Roelsema, in fact, had attempted to join that day as well. The barracks are close to his house. The recruiting officer told him to come back in 3 weeks. Now, in the movie, it's 10 days. At least that's what they're told by some shell-shocked recruiting officer. So the guys, they leave and then they slam the door, and they don't see the blood stuck to the inside of the door. War is a lot more real than these boys seem to think. So they drive off and they notice parachutes hanging in the trees. And Erik veers off to go home, promptly runs into a handful of German parachute troopers, the Fallschirmjäger, and they laugh and drink, and they just bought milk. And one of them actually asks him if he's been to a party. In the next scene, Alex is on bike patrol. That was a thing. We had those instead of tanks. So he asked permission to visit his parents during the break. And when he enters, he finds them arrested. Their house is filled with what appears to be refugees. They are detained German nationals, and his mother is quite salty and tells him the Germans are going to clean their clock. And she tells Alex the Queen has fled to England. She's pretty mean about it too. So a group is stopped by an irate man who tries to tell them there are parachute troopers near a farm. And we see Jan Weinberg, one of the fraternity kids, and he's in the squad, and they are sent to investigate. And it turns out it's a prank. It's a couple who is having sex in the hay, and the guy just starts laughing. And it turns out the couple just resume after telling them, look, there's an asylum nearby. Let's just let him out. And that's the extent of the war experience Jan Weinberg has. It's the car appears with a senior officer, a general, who tells them, well, boys, we're standing down. The war is over. Rotterdam has been bombed, and the country has capitulated. And he tells them, we've been betrayed by politicians and collaborators. Jan just demands, well, what was he supposed to do now? And so the next scene is summer, and girls are frolicking with German soldiers. And one of the men building a sandcastle calls her a moffelhoer. And this is Guus. Should I translate moffelhoer, what that means? So this girl laughs at him. And this is worth paying attention to. This is a cameo from Monique van der Ven, who is the lead actress in Turkish Delight and also in Keetje Tippel. the two previous films from Paul Verhoeven. So the scene reveals it's the guys and they have a boat. They want to flee to England and to go fight or something. And so Eric shows up. He brought gasoline and not a whole lot of it, but still. And they are hiding an outboard motor in a beach shed. This, in fact, this actually happened. They even attempted to escape twice. The Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, who was patrolling the shore, is actually headquartered at Scheveningen Beach, and they almost caught them. And apparently Hazelhoff dumped the outboard engine in the water. And in a recent book, this narrative is questioned, examined. Was he foiling these attempts for a reason other than just self-preservation? In the movie, it's shown as just a dumb accident. Guus was careless with a cigarette. Next, we see Robbie, the neighbor boy, tying a wire to a tree, and he's pretending to hang his mother's laundry. And as it turns out, he has a secret radio transmitter, and Eric is on to him. So Eric asks him to contact London for him to see if they can come and pick him up. Next up, we see Knight's Hall, the center of government, and it's now decked in German flags. And they have a special unit to track down the radio messengers broadcasting to England. It's a catering van, and it hides scanning equipment. And there's a girl outside riding a bike in front of it, and she's wearing a signals booster to ping and pinpoint the location. So Robbie starts to transmit, and the Sicherheitsdienst notice the signal and home in on him. But they don't quite get the location. And so at that point, Robbie tells Eric the good news. He can be a courier. Just then Esther shows up. It reminds Robbie to tell Eric, hey, you know what? We're engaged now. Whoop-de-doo. So Eric leaves, but we see Esther following him with her eyes. And, well, that really tells the story of the future of that engagement. Now, a couple of NSBers are teasing an old Jewish man, and they dump his cart in the canal. Jan sees this and starts beating them up. He almost kills one of them. And it takes Eric to drag him off and to stop him from getting arrested. Jan tells him, they're banning all the Jewish professors from the university. And he says, I just feel completely powerless. What am I supposed to do? So Eric tells him, look, you could go to England in my place. So in real life, Roelsema wrote a manifesto against this intended closure of the university and the expelling of the Jewish professors. And he actually had posters printed of it and dispersed it. He was not inconspicuous in doing so, and he was promptly arrested for it. So he missed the plane that was intended for him. But the group that tried to leave is arrested, kind of in the same way you see in the movie.
Ik kom voor Robbie.
Wat doet Jan hier?
Gaat in mijn plaats.
Wat is dat voor waanzin? Er is niks over afgesproken.
Robbie. De moffen hebben iets tegen Joden.
Had ik godverdomme net zo goed Esther mee kunnen sturen.
Ja. Had je kunnen doen.
Kom op, we kunnen niet blijven staan hier. Kom.
Dit is hem! Vooruit naar de boot.
We zien elkaar nog wel eens.
In Londen.
Kom op nou!
Hier gaat het om. Zorg dat het op tijd in Londen komt. Ja!
Jan! Jan!
Poffen! Waar heb je poffen?
Now, the scene with the water plane was actually copied by Spielberg, who loves that sequence and loves Soldier of Orange. And he used it for Indiana Jones. Now, the Sicherheidsdienst in the movie take Jan back to headquarters for interrogation. They are nice enough at first, to see if he's sympathetic, because this is the England spiel they're showing here. So they want to see if he can be turned. Jan, he doesn't want to cooperate. He says, I don't know anything. And so Breitner is, signaled to rough him up. So the general leaves and Breitner starts beating him up. And, he's beating up the wrong guy because Jan is a boxer and he can take a punch. But as we will soon learn, he can't take one in the kidneys. The Obersturmbannführer Geisman, he shows back up. And he's there to stop the beating and just sweet talk him because they're playing good cop, bad cop. And so he tells him, this was all pointless because it was all betrayed anyway. There's this guy in London called Van der Zande, and he's with us. You should just throw your lot in with us. It's a much better deal. But of course, Jan sticks to his guns. And outside, we see Erik walk past the Hofvijver where they are keeping Jan. Of course, Erik is fearful of, Jan breaking during the interrogation and giving him up. As we speak, Jan is being tortured. They have like this water hose up his ass. It's filling his intestines with water. Now, if you torture someone like that, you end up vomiting up your own shit through your mouth, and it hurts like hell. So, but Jan doesn't break. We see Guus leaving Sociëteit de Witte. It's nearby. Erik tells him, look, this is what happened. I need help. I need a place to stay. And so Guus starts teasing him, but ultimately just gives him the key to his place. He can stay as long as he likes. And in the next scene, Guus must have been inspired because he's in the dunes and he's bird watching, and some farmer is working and he notices him. And so next up, we see some NSB guy rewarding that farmer for giving Guus up. And of course, Guus is not there to look at birds. He's taking pictures of military installations, bunkers in the dunes. Now, those bunkers are real, and they are still there, in fact. They are a museum now, and there's stories about it. So at the end of the war, in 1945, there was a firefight between the SS and the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. So because the Navy wanted to surrender so they could go back home to Germany. But the SS, fanatical as ever, tried to force them to stay and to fight until the last man, which is, of course, pointless, but still. So what we know of it is that all the SSers were shot. The Canadian troops found the bunkers abandoned, except for those remains. War as hell, I guess. We see Guus and Erik having a beer at the tennis club. And kind of preposterous in a way. This is in the middle of the war, and they're just at the tennis club having a beer. But still, Guus shows him the rolls of film and asks him to take it to Nico of the Resistance. This is one of their sorority friends. So, as cavalier as he always is, it bites him in the ass this time because the Germans show up and they arrest everyone. So Erik causes a distraction so Guus can escape. But Erik is arrested and beaten and taken to the Orange Hotel. The Orange Hotel is the prison in Scheveningen, where sooner or later all resistance fighters end up. It's actually a famous prison. Erik recognizes Jan in there, and so that night they communicate with Morse through the walls. And this is how Erik learns that it was Van der Zande who betrayed the escape. Hulsema was arrested in real life, but there's no real evidence that were ever pictures. He claimed he was in there for weeks, up to a month, but nobody ever recognized him. So, according to German sources, he was only in there for a few days, perhaps because the Germans had plans for him. So the scenes in the movie also make it seem as if Erik is released quickly, despite Hulsema bragging to British intelligence and really anyone that would listen that he was in there a lot longer. So could it be that Paul Verhoeven and Richard Souterman suspected something during the script writing phase? I mean, Paul Verhoeven was a good judge of character, and he would have seized up his fraternity brother in seconds. So in the film, Jan lets him know that Van der Zande in London is the traitor. So Erik hears boots across the hall, and they are coming for Jan, and Erik starts shouting his name desperately. Jan is taken to the dunes, to the Waalsdorper Vlakte, where in the end, over 250 resistance fighters from that prison are ultimately executed in much the same way, even up to the point of the final days of the war. There's a famous case of resistance fighter Hannie Schafts. She was shot there. So apparently she wasn't shot outright. They clipped her. The firing squad didn't aim correctly and didn't kill her outright. So apparently she remarked, my aim is better. And so since the war, this has been a memorial site for the fallen. And we have like 2 minutes of silence. Now, the firing squad scene is actually an homage by Paul Verhoeven to Sam Peckinpah. It's from Ride the High Country. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, then you know that Ryan Rebalkin covers Sam Peckinpah and covered that film on the channel. So it's well worth checking out, in fact. One of Verhoeven's favorite movies is this Ride the High Country. Peckinpah's a major influence on his career. So in Ride the High Country, we see Steve Judd, played by Joel McCrea, and he's been shot and he's bleeding, but he takes one last look around as he dies, as just like the character Weinberg, who refuses his blindfold so he can look around and see a bird fly until he's riddled with bullets. Now, like Peckinpah, Paul shows the reality where other movies would not actually depict the execution. They would do something symbolic. Killing civilians was the German army's specialty. They've murdered at least 25 million of them in this war. Erik is led into the office of the warden. Sicherheitsdienst General is also there. And they want to know why Erik wrote his request for release on toilet paper and what did he use to write with. So Erik just says, mit Scheiße, Herr Director, with shit. And so, of course, this warden is deeply insulted and then asks him if he's crazy. And so Erik just says, well, maybe I just didn't have a pen. So the warden tells him, next time we'll have you shot. And he's promptly released. And you wonder why. Well, the Sicherheitsdienst is planning to have him followed. So Esther visits him in his student room to tell him Robbie wants to see him. So Erik shows her the Sicherheitsdienst guy that's standing outside. And so Esther starts taking her clothes off in front of the window. So Breitner can sort of guess what they're about to do. Thank you, Paul, for gratuitous boob shot number 2. Like I said, this movie is fantastic. So this deviant, sadistic Breitner is like easily convinced. Part of the reason is that the resistance, of course, was full of women for this reason. They were honey traps who would work on German soldiers. So meanwhile, Eric is escaping through the back and he's off to see the resistance. Eric leaves Leiden apparently and goes to The Hague because I'm sorry, I recognize these sets. And so he ends up watching a military parade, and this is actually the formation of the Dutch SS. And Eric recognizes Alex, his friend Alex, who has joined up, and he's shocked. Now, the Dutch Waffen SS, the Dutch Waffen Schutzstaffel, was 25,000 strong as part of the Viking division comprised of Dutch, Belgian, and Norwegian troops. And they would serve throughout the war until the very end, mostly on the Eastern Front. Now, Dutch losses alone amounted to 7,000 men. And in the movie, Eric greets Alex amongst the men just when Robbie accosts him. It's like, hey, is that a friend of yours? And so Robbie's radio is apparently back up, and he says, look, I want you to rejoin. And Eric just says, no, it's pointless. Everybody's betrayed. The SD is camped outside my door. I'm a danger to everyone. There's no point in doing this. He returns to his apartment where Esther is idling, reading a book. And so they end up in bed. Gratuitous boob shot number 3. Thank you very much. And outside of his house, Robbie is caught by the Sicherheitsdienst. And Breitner tells him, look, you're going to be broadcasting for us now. Put the screws on him. He says, your girlfriend, she looks kind of Jewish. That goes into work camps in Poland, and it's really not very good for their health. That kind of thing. So you could see that these people didn't really have a choice. Now, we see Eric graduating, much like Hulsema did, as he was one of the last ones to do so. University was actually about to close. Jacques comes to collect him to celebrate. So is Esther, with flowers, no less. Of course, they're Dutch. So they go into a bar to celebrate. And of course, this is all a ruse. He's surprised by Nico in the toilet. And so Nico says, hey, you still want to go to England? Nico can apparently get him on a Swiss ship. And Erik Lanshoff tells Esther, hey, I'm going to disappear for a while. So we see a German unit swarming a large ship. There are German naval officers aboard. And the Germans are there to check the crew. The crew is all Dutch, but they're not here yet. And so the next thing we see is like this raucous noise, these drunken sailors outside. And the Germans can't seem to get a grip on them. And because they're just too unruly. That's how they escape the formal security check. Basically, because the Kriegsmarine officers are, getting impatient and say they just overrule the Gestapo guy. And this is, in fact, how Hulsema fled the country. And what was not known at the time was that German archives show that they were fully aware he was leaving. And so that suggests they let him escape on purpose. And you have to wonder why. Now, down in the engine room, Eric starts shoveling coals. And, once they've cleared the port, the other guy who's shoveling coal reveals himself. And it's Guus. And this is actually the halfway point of the movie. Now, the Saint Serge rendezvous with a British ship, which is the HMS the Devonshire. And Guus and Eric are taken to the Royal Victoria Patriotic School in London. This is the place where they took all incoming escapees, or they are all there to be detained and then interrogated. And Lanshoff walks into his interrogation room, and he notices these flies dying in the windowsill. That tells you something. Enter the beautiful and talented Susan Penhaligon. She sits down and just stares at him, and then she notices the flies and takes her pencil and kills one of the flies. So the tone is set, and this is typical Paul Verhoeven style. So you don't need dialogue to build the tension in the scene. Their actions speak for themselves. So enter Edward Fox, playing Colonel Raffelli, who is an amalgamation of several British officers Hulsema dealt with, particularly his later superior, Colonel Rabagliati. Eric is questioned about the botched plane operation, gets a little argumentative, and Eric tries to starts telling them it was Van der Zande and he betrayed everything. And just at that moment, Van der Sande shows up in the flesh to welcome him. And in real life, something strange was going on in the school, in fact. What later proved to be a double agent for Germany was there, a man named Van Kautik. He was, in fact, debriefing refugees from the Netherlands even before the British would do that. And this was actually against protocol. Strange situation. And it kind of suggests that the British didn't really take this whole process seriously enough. The reports on Hulsema never made it to the Dutch authorities. Nevertheless, Hulsema did get an audience with Her Majesty the Queen Wilhelmina because she liked to welcome newcomers by having tea with them. So Lanshoff subtly suggests to Raffaelli that Van der Zande is a traitor in the scene. Reports from after the war show inquiries into Van het Zand, who is the real life Van der Zande, and especially if he had any connections to the Germans, but it was ruled out completely. But the report does state that does not mean Van het Zand wasn't working for a foreign agency. And what was suggested and never disclosed was that this foreign agency was the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA. Now, Lanshoff tails Van der Zande, who's much too wily. This guy spots him right away and he leads him on this merry-go-round, this chase. And so you see Lanshoff pulling out a tiny gun in a hidden cigar box, something a spy would do. So movie-wise, did Raffaelli provide him that? Where did he get this? Anyway, so Lanshoff doesn't get a clear shot at him and instead chases him into an alley where he promptly is apprehended. And so Van der Zande tells him, you've been reading too many detectives. Leads him straight into an audience with Her Majesty. So Guus is there and also Willem Oostgaarde, who was the third guy on the ship. None of these characters were actually real, except for the Queen and her lady-in-waiting, Mevrouw Verbrugge. The character of Willem is once again an amalgamation of several real people, presumably 3 resistance fighters. But he has a vastly different personality to them. So his character is really comic relief. So Willem is from the lower classes, and he has that fish out of water quality around the Queen. And so, of course, it marks the difference between these 2 core members, Lanshoff and Lejeune, who just have no trouble. And so, of course, Wilhelmina favors them. Verhoeven makes Willem answer the final resolution question. The Queen asks, so what are we supposed to do with these awful NSB'ers, Mr. Oostgaarde? What should be done about them? And he says, don't worry about them, Your Majesty. And he just says, which kind of suggests they should all be killed. And that's a moral compass question if there ever was one. Now, it does ask the question, just how different are we from the enemy? So in the car, Van der Zande suggests, maybe you were so easily released so you could blab about this traitor. Just, something like that is very valuable to German intelligence, to have someone under suspicion. So he's taken to a meeting, and this meeting is to more or less cajole him to return to the Netherlands, to be reinserted, so he can establish a better radio contact than the one they have, which is Robbie. So Guus is also recruited, and he's happy to, because he's not having much fun in boot camp. Instead, they receive spy training. It turns out Lanshoff really is unfit because he's blind as a bat. He can't hit any targets. And so we see Guus drive off with Susan, and later that night he fires shots into Lanshoff's room because he's drunk, and he took a shot at the mirror because he thought he was being threatened. So Lanshoff berates him, you need to keep your head straight. And he calls him Dick Boss, which is interesting. Dick Boss was a cartoon character during the war and post-war, and was very popular with children. In the cartoon, he's a jiu-jitsu expert and a private investigator who solves crimes. And this was, in fact, Paul Verhoeven's favorite comic book. Now, we see Wilhelmina sign a letter to order a subject to come to London. And it's the start of the subversion of this mission to contact Holland. And instead, they are suborned to become a kind of taxi service for Wilhelmina's cronies. Now, Hulsema had endeared himself to the Queen. He apparently gave her a Protestant Bible. Wilhelmina was extremely religious. He also gave her this impassioned patriotic speech. And this is interesting because before he left, he had never had or voiced any of these kinds of sentiments, but now he does. In this scene, which is taken directly from the book, she offers him Egyptian cigarettes. Giscus, the SD general, did the same thing to Jan Weinberg. He offered him cigarettes, and he offered him a way to escape death. He only needed to betray his friends. And now Lanzhoff is offered cigarettes as well. So they talk in the garden, and Lanzhoff spots Guus and Susan are in full foreplay in the windowsill. So we get gratuitous boob shot number 4. Thank you, Paul, my fellow boobman. So he tries to hide the impropriety from the queen. At the premiere, the current queen, Juliana, was warned not to watch, but does so anyway and laughs and this causes massive laughter and outburst in the audience. Domburg really captured the disapproving look that Queen Wilhelmina has to a T. And so, of course, Lanzhoff berates the lovers. And it's like, the queen, you dick, she's sitting first row. So we get more boob shots. Thank you, Paul. I started to suspect this is why he made Showgirls to, beat his previous record. So Susan cheats so her boyfriend can land on the shore. In real life, the landing was done by Peter Tazelaar. Hulsema actually never goes back until he lands with the queen after liberation. We see the pilot boat leave the harbor, make its way across the North Sea. Lanzhoff is seen putting smelly goo in his skin to make him puke. For a change, Paul doesn't show Rutger's junk in his shot and does kind of betray that they have international intentions with this movie. So Guus is in his tuxedo, and this is actually reality. Peter Tazelaar made it ashore in a tux, smelling like cognac, only to realize there was no party because this is a Tuesday. And by sheer luck, he's not picked up because this is actually a Sperrgebiet, a restricted area. And if you're caught after dark, you get shot. Peter Tazelaar, in fact, stood model for Ian Fleming's James Bond because he was the perfect secret agent. Ian Fleming was also in MI6 at the point. So was actor Christopher Lee, who was Ian Fleming's cousin. It's a small world. Now Lanzhoff returns, and Susan picks him up in her pretty red sports car, and Lanzhoff bites her on the finger, and the added finger she added so Guus could go ashore, not him. And of course, Erik is cucking his friend because that's what Lanzhoff actually does best. Now, meanwhile, the cuck is walking through occupied Scheveningen, the very street where my wife's grandparents had a bakery on that very street during the war. Guus is there to make contact. So he gives the password and he meets up with Nico's group, who have several people there to make the crossing to England to join Wilhelmina as her counsel. So there's this admiral, and he makes this remark to a socialist politician and leaves because he wants no part of this. Verhoeven shows with this scene the divide between the royal family and the Dutch elites. The socialist agrees to become part of the new democracy. Side note, the Social Democrats dominated Dutch politics after the war. Take that for what you will. Now, Guus finds that his supposed waterproof radio is ruined by seawater. So they turn to Robbie. When Lanzhoff sees it, he questions it. And so they compromise by sending Lanzhoff to land to make a phone call from a phone booth on shore. Now, we see Robbie get into Breitner's car. He doesn't have enough information for him. Breitner gets pissed and he starts showing him the yellow star and asks him, what coat would look best for Esther to wear this? And so Esther asks Robbie, who's your creepy friend? Lanzhoff is shown sailing back to the Dutch coast. He has to wear a British uniform. The argument is that the Germans won't know the difference in the dark. Meanwhile, at headquarters, Verhoeven shows the British attitude towards the operation. If they succeed or fail is irrelevant. It's just to keep the Germans busy, make them think the invasion will come through Holland. it's an obvious strategy because, that's why the Benelux countries were always filled with elite SS units were fitting for battle because, it's the first place that they would attack or expect an attack. All this, of course, would bite Britain in the ass. Because of the Englandspiel, they couldn't trust the messages from the Dutch resistance. They couldn't rely on them. And so when Operation Market Garden came around, they wouldn't listen to reports from the Dutch resistance that there were significant tank armies stationed around the intended attack sites for their airborne division. And it's one of the reasons Market Garden failed, because they thought they were just fighting Hitlerjugend kids and old men, but in fact they were up against battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front. Lanzhoff is back on land and he bluffs his way through security and he manages to requisition a bike from some civilian for a faster getaway. And meanwhile, we see Guus using Robbie's transmitter again. Breitner surprises them, but Robbie throws his transmitter at him and kills both of the Germans. And he demands to come with them to England because he says, I'm no longer safe here. I killed 2 SD guys. So Guus finally agrees. And so you can hear the phone ring as they're escaping. You can hear Guus yell, just let it ring. And the SD men getting back up. They weren't dead. It's all staged. In fact, the Germans are here to capture the entire network, the entire group. So they hear the phone ringing. It's Eric, and he's calling from Esther's, but nobody's picking up. So Eric asks Esther's, why aren't you wearing a star? And where's all this liquor coming from and the chocolate, and you can even get this stuff in England, and what's going on here? And so Esther says, oh yes, just because Robbie can get stuff because he's in the resistance. And so Lanzhoff frowns at her, but in the end he just says, well, I need you to go to my parents and get my tux. So Guus and his charges pass the checkpoint, but in fact right on their heels is the general and Breitner. And we see Eric arrive on his bike in his tux. He hinders a car, and that car is filled with party girls. And so he drops in it and makes it past the checkpoint. And the girls are all drunk, and they drag him to this party, which isn't really supposed to happen, but he just goes with it. And so inside, 2 officers are dancing a tango, and they're entertaining everyone. And so Eric notices one of them is Alex, and Alex recognizes him right away, and he swings over and he grabs him, and then they dance. This is another homage. So Verhoeven stole this scene from Bernardo Bertolucci, and during the dance, Alex and Eric are challenging each other. Alex at some point says, well, in a few years, you English and us Germans will be fighting the communists together. And Eric just says, nah, I don't buy it. And so Alex says, well, we won't be around to see it.
Het valt me van je tegen dat ik je hier zie, tussen al die NSB'ers. Die bunkerbouwers.
Ach, het is oorlog. Het is toch een leuk feest?
Ik heb gehoord dat je in het buitenland was.
Gelul.
Ik heb gehoord dat je in Londen was.
Nee hoor, ik zit hier. Zie je toch?
Toch jammer dat we niet dezelfde kant vechten.
Ja, is jammer.
Over een paar jaar vechten de Duitsers en de Engelsen samen tegen de communisten.
Daar geloof ik niet in.
Maken wij niet meer mee. Eind van de oorlog halen we niet meer. Op Londen, oude spion.
Spioneren voor de Duitsers in Londen. Oh, breng je dan een paar nylonkousen voor me mee?
Oh, wat heb je daar een mooie bron.
IJzeren kruis.
Wat stoer
Waar heb je
zeg.
dat aan verdiend?
Russische tank opgeblazen?
Pauw, 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 pauw.
Erik, heb jij van die
Lex,
tijd?
slik erop.
Spioneren is toch veel gevaarlijker?
Die is van mij.
En godverdomme, geef hier. Kijk, dat speelgoed.
Hij is van mij.
The interesting thing is that Churchill had deep misgivings about Stalin. And of course, Britain started the war because of their ally, Poland, was attacked. So Operation Unthinkable was a post-war plan to attack Russia with the help of remnants of the German Wehrmacht. And in fact, there was this American general called Patton who voiced similar sentiments. And this was right before he got into a car accident and tragically died. So Alex is teasing Eric by trying to give him his Iron Cross. You know, you earned it. You know, spying is much more dangerous. And so the whores they are with are they foil it, and in the confusion, Eric managed to scamper. Outside, he notices that German units are positioning artillery pieces. There's something going on. So he manages to find Guus, and he tells him, you know, Robbie's a collaborator, and we're in big trouble here. He tries to stop him, but they can't stop Robbie from firing off a flare. German units are coming out of the shadows, and Eric sees this, and he sees his study friend Nico get shot up, starts yelling for Guus. So they are both running into the water, and Eric manages to find the boat, but Guus isn't so lucky. Now, the extrication en route out of the water is something Verhoeven has filmed before in his promotional film for the Navy, which was over a decade before this. Guus manages to make it back to land. He trails Robbie, who is coming from SD headquarters, and liquidates him. The liquidation is successful, but he does get caught in the attempt. I mean, shooting him right outside of German headquarters. Guus never was really smart. Now, while they were filming this, actor Jeroen Cabé tells this story about how a man, one of the extras, had a epileptic seizure and fell on the ground and was bleeding, and other extras were trying to help him. And apparently, Paul Verhoeven got irate and just told everybody just leave him alone and just to keep shooting. You know, for art you have to suffer. Eric has to give the bad news to the Queen. It doesn't fall very well, and so he's basically dismissed. Susan, of course, is happy to lift his spirits. She smashes his glasses so he can sneak peeks with a shard at the eye exam for the RAF. And I don't think he was fooling anybody, but I suspect the RAF was desperate for pilots, so they would have let any idiot into a plane. Now, afterwards, Susan and Eric celebrate until he has a premature ejaculation. Welcome to Dutch filmmaking. Alex is at the Eastern Front, and he mails a postcard to Eric. We see a little boy who begs him for food. And so Alex throws this piece of bread at him that he was eating. So it lands in the mud, and this kid doesn't appreciate that. So the child assassinates him by fragging him on the latrine.
Melden Sie sich bitte. Antworten Sie bitte. Hier ist Delta. Bitte melden.
Die Karte kommt doch nicht auf.
Na und? Hier ist Delta. Bitte melden.
Klep, Hunger. Da.
This is an expensive scene, and it would seem unnecessary, but Paul Verhoeven always seems to get his way. Now, we see Eric dancing with Susan at a party. It's Christmas. We see Willem put a pilot's hat on him, so he made it into the RAF. And they have to drop some bombs. Willem in the cockpit gives him the card Alex sent him, and so they prop it up on the dash. Now, meanwhile, Guus is screaming his lungs out in a German captivity. The Germans have enough of it, and we see them jamming a needle down in his throat. And then they carry him outside and guillotine him. Now, according to the actor Jeroen Cabé, the needle was gigantic, and Paul wanted a close-up of it going in all the way. So Cabé only agreed to do it after he cut off most of it with pliers before finally acting out the scene. And you can hear a plane flying over as Guus is put under the chopping blade. Willem and Eric drop their payload over Nuremberg. Not explained, but they are part of the Pathfinder squadron. The Pathfinders fly over a target to mark it, and then the 4-engine Lancasters behind them that follow them firebomb where they mark the target. And then you see them returning to the Christmas party, and Susan, in fact, is still there. She's a party girl. A telegram arrives for him. It is the Queen who has asked him to be his adjutant. So we see the plane, the Dakota, land, and it's flying the flag of the House of Orange. It is a welcoming defilé for the Queen, and we are back at the start of the movie. The post-war era under the House of Orange has begun. Verhoeven shows the liberation ceremonies of the return of the Queen. She's beloved now because of her regular radio speeches on the radio. The entire population would listen to it with a radio secreted in their house or elsewhere. And the Queen is seen to mumble to Roelsema, "Could you have dropped a bomb on this palace?" I should explain the royals are famous for their dissatisfaction with their palaces, with their quarters. Most of them are monumental buildings, and they're all from the Republican era. And that's a time where the House of Orange was not ruling the country, or their ancestors were not holding any cities. And so they're not very happy about that. We see Eric drive past Esther's place. He finds her hair on the curb. She's been slut-shamed. Esther explains that she's glad she survived by any means necessary. And she notes, well, so have you, except, you're a hero now. So the romance is definitely over. Now, we see Eric driving through Leiden, and the place is one big party. And he whistles to his old student room. Jacques comes up to the balcony, and he's amazed to see him. And in his apartment, Eric looks at the picture of them all together. And he and Jacques are the only two left. And so they toast the future. And so ends Soldier of Orange. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Moffe.